Hello everyone, X-Wall-Kill Bethelite here, and I want to talk about something that is oftentimes used as an excuse for Jehovah's Witnesses. And that is that Jehovah's Witnesses are brainwashed, Jehovah's Witnesses are indoctrinated. It's only the governing body, just a few people in New York who are evil. Jehovah's Witnesses are all loving and warm and kind, and the governing body just tricked them. That is an overexaggeration. That is an extreme overexaggeration. Yes, there is some indoctrination involved with cults. That's true. Yes, cults try to use information control, where they try to stop you from getting information from any source other than from the cult. The cult definitely uses manipulation tactics. But to say Jehovah's Witnesses have no mental capacity to think at all is a complete outright lie. I watched a video not long ago, and the video started off talking about how loving and kind and warm believing Jehovah's Witnesses are. And I'm thinking, if this person was at all trying to make an honest statement, they would say maybe some believing Jehovah's Witnesses are loving, kind people. You couldn't possibly say that they all are kind, loving people. Logically, that just doesn't make sense. All of any religion isn't all kind, loving, warm people. There's no religion on the planet that is just filled with all loving, kind people, let alone a cult. So I hear it often, and I don't want people to be deceived into thinking that Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't know that shunning is wrong. They don't know that shunning is hurtful. They only do it because their governing body told them to, and all thought process came to a halt. They're incapable of, they can't think. If that were true, how do they go to work? If their brains were washed, and what that means is they can no longer think. How do they go to work? How do they get into cars and operate the vehicle? How do they continue to maintain a household if they're not capable of thinking? It's an over-exaggeration. We want to definitely tell the truth about Jehovah's Witnesses being in a cult, and cults using tactics in order to try to keep members stuck in the cult. But what we don't want to do is over-exaggerate and just try to use a cop-out so that everyone looks at Jehovah's Witnesses as if they are these innocent angels that don't know that if a relative is in the hospital, that person might need support. They don't know that if a baby needs a blood transfusion to survive, it's probably not very loving to let the child die because the Watchtower organization told them to, knowing full well that the Watchtower organization is constantly getting their doctrine wrong. Watchtower has got to be the most unreliable source of information there is. They themselves constantly say that the light is getting brighter to them, or in other words, they're constantly changing their viewpoint on things because they were always wrong. When you think about a person being indoctrinated, I can use myself as an example. For the most part, I didn't read anything outside of Watchtower literature. For a good while, I didn't watch anything on television other than theocratic videos or videos that came from Watchtower. So basically, my daily routine was I would go out in field service, pioneering, and then after field service, I'd be really tired because I worked third shift, so I would go to sleep. And then I woke up and I would eat. And if I had time before needing to go back to work, I would do some personal study or study some of the cult's books, or I would sit back and watch one of the videos from the cult. I don't think you get more indoctrinated or brainwashed than I was. I was giving talks at like 7 years old, standing on stools. I didn't know too much of anything else but the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I went to Bethel, where I was just surrounded and engulfed in it. You don't get too much more indoctrinated than what I was. But what that indoctrination does not do is transform your entire personality to make you do things you ordinarily would not do. And I didn't shun people. I didn't know the word shun. When I was in the cult, I didn't even know the word shun. I knew that there was disfellowshipping and that a person's name would be announced, and pretty much people would ignore them after that. But I always felt bad about it. And I never did it to a relative. Never. I never saw it getting done to one of my relatives. So essentially, my exposure while in the cult to shunning was regulated to a person's name being announced and the congregation as a whole, for the most part, no longer talking to that person. But it hadn't been a relative. So it wasn't somebody that I knew very well. And usually, if I ran into somebody that was disfellowshipped, whether it be in a gas station or what have you, I would go over and say hello. In my mind, in that cult, and keep in mind, I read every bit of literature. I read the Awake, the Watchtower. That's all I did. You're talking to a person who went to both English and Spanish meetings at 2 different Kingdom halls regularly. I read and absorbed everything from that cult. And when I saw a person disfellowshipped, I didn't even think nothing was wrong with going over, saying hello, asking how they were. And there was one person in particular, of course, I'm not going to name their name, but when I ran into them at the gas station, I did ask them how they were doing. Are you okay? And I meant it. And they were looking at me like, people don't normally talk to me when I've been disfellowshipped. And I'm like, of course I'm not going to just hang out with you the whole day, but I'm going to ask if you're okay. And then before I left, I extended my arms to give them a hug. And they looked at me like, oh, you want a little love there. And then they just reached in and I gave them a hug. And then I walked away because for me, I thought a person who was disfellowshipped was a person who needed redirection. They needed redirection and they needed a strong wake-up call. But the concept of shunning, in the sense of I'm going to not speak to this person. I don't care if they're what type of condition they're in or what they're going. I'm just not going to talk to them. How is it that it didn't occur to me? To me, that was perfectly fine what I did. I would have done it in front of everybody that was a Jehovah's Witness. I would have walked up to them, asked the disfellowship person if they're okay, gave them a hug, and then walked away. I had a friend who I went to the meeting one day and I didn't see him there. And I didn't think nothing of it. I mean, people miss a meeting every now and again. And then the next week comes around and I go to the meetings again and I don't see him again. So that's the second week. I didn't see him at any of the meetings. So what I did was I went to their house. What a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses do is they immediately shun. They don't even know what's going on. They don't know what happened. The person could be in the hospital for all they know. They immediately shun. What I did is I went to his apartment, knocked on the door, said it was me. He eventually let me in and I sat down and talked to him. I asked how he's been doing because I ain't seen him at the hall for a while. And he was telling me that he'd done some things that he wasn't proud of and this, that, and the third. And my thought was, well, you're going to need to tell the elders so that they can help you out, give you some sort of instruction and correction that will help you out of the situation. It was never a situation of after he said that, I just stopped coming by. I just didn't hang out with him all day. I just didn't go do whatever it was he was involved with. That's what I thought that sort of thing was. And he wasn't disfellowshipped at the time. He hadn't even talked to, quote unquote, the elders about what he did. He was telling me because I had enough kindness to stop by and check on the guy. So for me, and this is even after Bethel, I always thought disfellowshipping was strong correction. I never even knew what shunning was, and I was a JW. And the reason is because I just wasn't around it. I had a relative who had got disfellowship, and their family made it a point not to shun them. Keep in mind, I didn't know the word shun back then. But I knew they were disfellowshipped, and their sisters talked to them like normal. At the assembly, their sisters and their family would walk with them, talking to them during the district assembly, walking darn near by the stage. They wanted the whole district to see that they're not going to shun their relative. Me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, there's nothing wrong with it. This is their family. Obviously, we're not going to throw a party and have a bunch of people over and just party with the person, because I figure they just needed to really focus on their situation and work on getting things better. So for me to have gone to Bethel, and I didn't shun anybody because I didn't even understand the concept, proves that people who shun, oftentimes, what that is, it's an excuse to discard somebody that a Jehovah's Witness thinks will make them look bad, or a Jehovah's Witness thinks will affect their ability to reach some sort of privilege or title that they're trying to get. A person may want to be an elder, and they may shun a relative who isn't going to meetings to look good in front of the congregation so that they can become an elder. they're oftentimes doing it for selfish reasons. Oftentimes they just don't want to face the fact that they're in a cult. They have a relative. This relative knows it's a cult. The relative has told them that you're in a cult. They can't prove that they're not. They know they probably are. They don't want to face it. The easiest thing for them to do is just discard the relative. Jehovah's Witnesses practice this shunning when they want to, when it's convenient for them. Oftentimes, they don't want to put in the work to help a relative with a situation. They rather just throw them away. This is not the indoctrination. This is not brainwashing. When I was at Bethel, I had a relative who came for a tour. Now, I didn't know that they came for a tour. I know I had some relatives in general coming to have a tour at Bethel. But there was a specific person that didn't want to be associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. They made it known. They do not want to be associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. I found out from one of the people that came to tour that particular relative was there and that they came to tour and they drove a long way to get to Bethel. And now the people of Bethel are telling them that they're not allowed to go on a tour. Everybody else can go, but they can't go. They're telling me this, and I'm at Bethel. My thought was, well, essentially, this is my explanation of it back then. And keep in mind, this is a person that's read all the literature, was as brainwashed and indoctrinated as anybody. And my view of it was, well, they just have to be careful that they don't appear to openly be encouraging certain types of behaviors. So my thought was, oh, they're not going to just take them on the regular route because, I mean, that would just be openly pretty much being okay with whatever it is he's involved with or however he feels about, my thought was, Jehovah at the time. I wasn't thinking I needed to shun the person, so my advice was, you guys go on the regular tour. Tell her you guys go on the regular tour. My thought was, have that person meet me, and I'll just show them around. They can't go on an official tour, but the loving thing to do would be to at least show them around, you know what I mean, and talk to them about, Bethel and how it works and all those things. So I did. I was on the phone with them, talking to them about Bethel, how it works, what I do, and all that sort of thing. So why is it that the most indoctrinated person as a part of that cult, why wasn't I shunning then? It's because it wasn't part of my personality. And the cult didn't change my freaking DNA. They don't freaking DNA wash, change the person completely to a whole nother being. I'm going to be myself and I'm going to do what I think is right. And I never saw in any literature at that time, I didn't, that said flat out, you shun family. I never saw it that flat out said you shun family. I had relatives that got DF that I hadn't spoken to in a long time, primarily because they shunned themselves. They didn't come around me. They didn't call, or they didn't answer when I called. I never shunned. So why is it that I was indoctrinated and I didn't flat out shun because I didn't think it was right? Didn't even know it was a thing. I thought these people's families still talked to them. I didn't know that their family didn't even talk to them. Why is it I didn't shun I just thought the person needed strong correction. But you have other Jehovah's Witnesses, other cult members, and they do shun their direct relatives. I'm talking sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. I'm talking direct relatives. They treat them as if they're dead. I never saw in the literature, treat your family like they're dead. I never saw it. Because I was an honest-hearted JW. I really believed it back then. I probably would have had an issue with it and would have brought it up. And may have woken up before I even got to Bethel if I knew it was a teaching. So that's a cop-out. It's a cop-out that Jehovah's Witnesses are a bunch of loving, kind people. And they're treating their own family, regardless of what that family member is going through, as if that person is dead because, well, they're so loving and Watchtower tricked them. That's false. That is very false. And it's very misleading. There are people who are in that cult because it fits who they are. They're an evil person, and they found the perfect environment for them, an evil cult. So they shun because they choose to shun. They stop checking on the well-being of their own children because they choose to stop checking on the well-being of their own children. They didn't read a Watchtower that said never check on your kids for the rest of their lives. They didn't read that. They're just evil people. And what happens is Watchtower doesn't stop it. If you decide you're just not going to talk to a person for the rest of your life because they decided they didn't want to be a part of that cult, what Watchtower is going to do is they're not going to stop you from doing it. They're not going to discourage you from doing it. They're not going to flat out tell you to do something like that. I mean, that's not written. If it is written down to not speak to a relative for the rest of their lives, show me the article. Because I don't still read Watchtower articles. That's back in the early 2000s that I was at Bethel. So from the time I was a teenager on up, I hadn't come across the direction that if a family member is in the hospital, you don't contact this disfellowshipped family member to even let them know. If the family member who's disfellowshipped is in the hospital and needs help getting around, you leave them and treat them as if they were dead, and you do not offer any assistance to your direct son, daughter, mother, or father. I've never read that. These people do it because they're evil people, and Watchtower doesn't stop them or prevent them. Watchtower's not going to say anything about it. If you guys are going to go out and treat your family like that, we ain't going to stop you. So this is important for people to really understand, because people don't fully understand how evil and bad this cult is if they're thinking all these people are loving and warm and Watchtower is controlling their brains, like literally 100% controlling their brains, and they don't know what they're doing. That's false. That's false. I was brainwashed too into thinking that Jehovah was somehow controlling Bethel. Didn't know how, but I had never been there before, other than going on a tour, so I figured it would all make sense once I got there. It was not a situation where I was incapable of thinking. When I got to Bethel and saw people walking around with the largest cases of alcohol you could imagine, for one person. It's like one person and their wife in a room, and they're walking in the room with a box of beer so big they can't even hardly carry it. I knew something was off. I knew something was wrong. I wasn't incapable of thinking. When I would see on morning worship at Bethel, discussions about being loving and caring and talking to your fellow Bethelites as you see them in the hall versus just coldly walking by everybody that's not in your clique. I didn't listen to that and think this is I listened to that and thought, man, nobody does this at Bethel. People don't walk around saying hello unless they're a non-Bethelite that's on tour there. Like, people hang with their little clique and they don't care about anybody else at Bethel. So I'm listening to these things on morning worship, and I know it's not being done. Matter of fact, sometimes morning worship was like a comedy show, just talking about stuff we don't do. I knew it was wrong. I knew something was off. And I was, in my mind, thinking I'm going to try to fix it as best I could. And then part of what woke me up was Watchtower deciding we're going to sell buildings. And instead of letting the Bethelites stay at one of the many properties that Watchtower owns, until they get another facility, they're just telling people to hit the door. I knew that wasn't loving. If brainwashing and indoctrination really meant you became a robot and were incapable of thinking, then I wouldn't have known that anything was wrong with that. I knew something was wrong with all these people that were doing all this for Watchtower, and Watchtower just said, hit the door. We don't care where you go. Just go somewhere other than here while we make money off of these buildings. I knew it was wrong. Other people knew it was wrong. And they were very capable of processing that thought. Now, many people just didn't want to talk about it. When I got back from Bethel and I was talking about, man, that's strange. I've never known Watchtower to do anything like that. Or back then I said us. I've never known us to do anything like this. And I'm talking to Jehovah's Witnesses about, and they just don't want to hear it. It's not that they can't think. They don't want to hear it. So they rush off the phone with me because they know it's wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Jehovah's Witnesses are fully aware that the extreme shunning, when I'm talking not talking to them, period, not checking on their well-being, period, they know that's wrong. But it helps them get positions within that organization, and it helps them look a certain way within that organization where they feel like they've got prominence. And they do it because they're bad people, period. Not because they're brainwashed, not because they're indoctrinated. I was too. They do it because that's their character. They would turn their back on family. That's just their character. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. But stating that Jehovah's Witnesses that are indoctrinated and brainwashed and they're all warm and loving and it's just a couple people in New York that are bad, that is false. That's a false belief. That's a false teaching right there. X Wall Kill Bethelite signing out.